Narrative Analysis, Dialogic Performance by Lori Austell, Sean Bunning, Cami Dene, Philip Olt, Pamela Wimbush, and Leona Wanningberg. An article by Reisman, Narrative Methods for the Human Sciences. What is dialogic performance analysis? A broad and varied interpretive approach to oral narrative. Makes selective use of elements of the other two methods, thematic and structural, and adds other dimensions. Interrogates how talk among speakers is interactively, dialogically produced and performed as narrative. It asks who an utterance may be directed to and for what purposes. What is required of dialogic performance analysis? Close reading of context, including the influence of investigator, setting, and social circumstances on the production and interpretation of narrative. The active presence of the investigator in the text. A complex choreography between teller and listener, speaker and setting, text and reader, and history and culture. What does this mean? As readers, we have an active voice as we engage in the text. It is only when the reader is given the chance to participate activity that he will regard the text whose intention he himself has helped to compose as real. Performing the last day at work, disability and masculine identity. A conversation that developed during a single research interview with Bert, a man who was unemployed as a result of a disability. Interviewee, Bert, at every opportunity, redirected the long and memorable conversation back to the progression of his illness. The interviewer returned to the conversation many times in order to read it differently and present another perspective on the stories. The moments that Bert chose to dramatize were used to construct his identity as a man. Saving face. Goffman theorized that social actors stage performances that present themselves in a favorable light while describing situations of difficulty, in other words, to save face with the listener. During the interview, Bert performs or enacts key moments in order to construct his identity or how he would like to be known in the conversation. The interviewer placed herself as the immediate audience for this performance, thereby becoming an active participant in the narrative and its interpretation. Central point about the dialogic approach. Readers are inherently part of the interpretive process. They bring their positioned identities and cultural filters to assist with the interpretation of the story. The writer must acknowledge that audiences will read the narrative text in all sorts of ways. Why is dialogic performance analysis useful? It can uncover the insidious ways that structures of inequality and power can work their way into what appears to be simply a conversation about a man's disability. Narrative investigators can bring hidden dimensions of power into their readings. Raising their voices, mad girls in the classroom. Research neglects whiteness as a racial identity and rural experiences of class. Psychologist Lynn Michael Brown attempted to understand white girls' understanding of their school and teachers by conducting a study of pre-adolescent girls from two cultural communities in Maine. In discussion groups at each school, These girls spoke about their relationships with one another, their families, teachers, and schools. A voice-centered method of data analysis required 5 distinct reviews of each interview and group session. 5 listenings. First was to locate the girls' position and subjectivity. Second, the way the girls speak for and about themselves. Third, discussions of anger and social critique. Fourth, how the girls define and discuss female behavior. Fifth, how they accommodate, resist dominant cultural constructs of femininity. Gestures and movements were also documented. Because Brown's thematic investigation focused on the girls' class identities and anger, the author doesn't investigate the performance narrative. Student to teacher. Brown saw a deep divide between these working class girls and their women teachers. Brown determined the students could read their teachers and vice versa. As a result, the working class girls become mad girls in the classroom, resisting authority and disrupting the classroom. Exemplar. The exemplar illustrates a broad interpretive approach to an ethnographic. Brown incorporated aspects of thematic methods and some attention to language use. However, it departs in key ways from the approaches featured in the earlier chapter. Brown's comparative approach generates knowledge about girls' opposing class identities and their related school experiences from close observation of their collaborative performances. Girls' narratives are only a small part of the data. This exemplar of the dialogic performative approach can serve as a model for others. The investigator's way of coding different listenings is methodical and appropriate to analyzing complex interactions in focus groups, community meetings, and classrooms. Future research tips. This study was included to the kind of spontaneous narrative performances field workers are likely to encounter when they enter classrooms and community settings. Stories told in group settings are less likely to be rehearsed or may not have been told similarly before. Group stories typically lack the beginnings, middles, and ends like you find in research interviews. In ethnographic work, identifying a unit of analysis is not really appropriate. Dialogic investigation addressed difficult questions by looking beyond superficial, literal, and consciously intended practices of language use. Epiphanies of the ordinary. Sharing time, also called show and tell, in one first grade classroom served as the only time where students got to choose what they talked about. This activity in a diverse classroom highlights the privilege imbued to some children. The sharing time allows for cultural exchange, both in linguistics and content, among the students. Students with disadvantages may be behind academically, but the sharing time allows for peer encouragement, leading to learning gains. For advanced students and adults, this public learning process can be difficult or even painful to observe. By observing the development of sharing by one disadvantaged student over time, the teacher was able to recognize several significant developments. The student's stories developed coherence over time. The student gained authority among the group in areas of unique experience. After a public confrontation about dishonesty, the teacher adjusted the rules to allow made-up stories. The student began telling increasingly fantastical stories, which provided exceptional engagement and entertainment for the class. The student's performance came to include aspects of theatrical performance, including both vocal and physical acting. The innovative genre of inclusive storytelling that Gala's focal subject had developed during the class sharing time began to be adopted by the rest of the class, with both earlier and later adopters depending in part on their social positioning. The group adoption of this unique, fantastical storytelling style worked to bring the children together socially in new ways and to form a new group identity. Alternative readings of Gala's work. Reisman draws attention to the theme of identity performances in this final exemplar, Gala's classroom research. Identity performances that function at both the individual and group levels. Educators could read the same text as commentary on differential access to literacy and a teacher's ability to level the playing field. Through a social justice lens, the work can be read as a model for building egalitarianism in a classroom through the use of inclusionary, sociocentric stories. And from a research methodologist's perspective, one can read the work as an example of the investigator's responsiveness to input within the field and the resultant choice to shift her interrogation toward an emerging theme, in this case, the use of imagination within the group's sharing time. Key methodological points from Gala's work. Gallus approaches her work primarily as an ethnographer and made a routine of regular data collection within her practice as a classroom educator. She used the students' questions about her note-taking as an opening to specify the kinds of things she was interested in coming to understand. And this in turn served as a springboard for further classroom dialogue. Gala's reserved judgment on what information in her data was relevant until later in the process of analysis and reflection. She employed a broad conception of narrative, attending to language, signs, and context, and viewing stories as evolving dialogues with multiple participants. She chose to provide a detailed representation of the dialogues in her transcriptions, noting pauses, interruptions, and brief offs to evince the structure of the interaction. Galas also attended to the rich contextual information surrounding the narrative, commenting on the politics of gender, class, and race within the classroom. In conclusion, the dialogic performance approach combines elements of thematic and structural analysis in a broader investigation that attends to the complexities inherent to the dialogic environment. 3 exemplars were used in this paper, selected primarily for their common thematic focus on the construction and performance of identities. The 3 exemplars also illustrate the researcher's attention to structure and context and inclusion of their own voice within the resulting research text, inviting the reader to also join in the interpretation. These research texts diverge from the convention of traditional social science writing in that they do not compartmentalize methods, findings, and discussion, and in their purposeful self-consciousness and subjectivity. This approach differs from other forms of narrative analysis in the importance it gives to the local context of the data collection and the assumption that meaning resides in the interaction rather than in the language of the speaker. Thank you.